And we coordinate the European Blue Biobank project from there. The European Blue Biobank project has been doing, let's say, a number of actions in terms of awareness around a legal framework called the Nagoya Protocol, and hence the title of this workshop, Don't Be a Biopirate, which in fact is not original. It comes from another output from a previous project. But I think it's a very good title to kind of set the scene of what we will be talking about. In any case, EBB, the European Blue Biobank project, is an Interreg project. There are 12 partners from the Atlantic area, and it's mainly about marine biological resources, about facilitating access to these marine biological resources. First of all, because most of the partners, or some of the partners, have holdings, have culture collections, or have biobanks where these marine biological resources are kept, and sometimes kept alive. And secondly, because we help users, and this is something that we will be talking about also here today, we help users to get access to these marine biological resources in compliance with the Nagoya Protocol, with a legal framework also called like access and benefit sharing. We will be talking a little bit about that, and we will try that you that after this meeting, if in particular if you are a user of marine genetic resources, things are a little bit more clear to you. So in fact, before starting with the presentation, etc., we would like to learn a little bit more about the audience. I think, well, by now we have 27 participants. So in order to understand a little bit more, maybe most of you are experts on all this, so in that case we will speed things up. But if Carla Dominguez, please, from Forum Oceano, if you can launch the first question of the poll, just to get an idea of the level of understanding of the participants about this about Nagoya Protocol. So
we'll give more people are voting.
Yeah, I suppose you've seen the poll. You just have to answer and send it. It's anonymous, and so it's just basically to know how many of you already have heard already about Nagoya Protocol.
So almost everyone voted. Let's give some more minutes.
And then you can share the results with us, can't you, Carla?
Yes, yes. Okay.
I should say that I have answered myself.
Yes, me too, it's true.
Okay. I'm going to share the results with you now. Can you see?
Yes.
Okay.
Very good. So approximately half of us, we do know about Nagoya, in the sense that at least the name rings a bell, even if it's just superficial. And some of you, for some of you, it will be the first time, so it's also interesting. And those who have a fair, good understanding of it, which I assume, well, first of all, us, I mean, the ones who are participating, by now we have a reasonably good understanding of it. We will also be able kind of provide feedback and a little bit more insight. So, okay, very good. This is, it's a good start, I would say. And then maybe the second, can you also launch the second, just to know whether we have some people in the audience from the private sector, from the industry, or it's mainly academic? So, yes, the second, yeah, exactly, thank you. This is easier, maybe. We probably don't have to wait so much.
Okay, I think it's ready. I'm going to close.
Okay.
So
Oh,
okay.
well, okay. I thought the percentage would be higher for the, let's say, public academia sector. So in fact, we have half. I know there are some representatives from clusters. We know them, so that's very good. Okay, excellent. Thanks. And yes, before starting with the serious business here, I would also, like to thank the keynote speakers, or Fifth and Yvonne, who will be presenting that, and then also the members of the roundtable later on that I will introduce. Thanks again to the audience, and please, yes, as I said, don't hesitate to ask questions or make comments. And I think it's 10:10, so we should just go on. So Yvonne, you have the floor.
Thanks, Belen. I will try to share my screen with you. I hope you are able to see my screen. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So it's very nice to talk to somebody for whom this is the first time. So I'm going to be introducing you into what the Nagoya protocol is and what an access and benefit sharing means. Besides being quite a complicated way to call something access and benefit sharing, it's an intricate legal solution for, I would say, quite nice goals. I come from academia. I am an academic from the moment in which I get up in the morning to the moment in which I go to bed in the afternoon. I'm not lying to anybody. So I'm going to tell you my experience with the Nagoya protocol and the experience I have gained through the EBB project with the Nagoya protocol, trying to set the scene for you to understand what it means. So the Nagoya protocol is about access and benefit sharing. The origins of access and benefit sharing have to be traced back to the Convention of Biological Diversity that tries to conserve biodiversity. The Convention on Biological Diversity came into force on December 1993 and has been signed by most of the countries in the planet, by 196 parties, and it has got 3 main objectives, out of which the first 2 were formulated, the first ones. The first 2 was conservation of biodiversity, and the second, sustainable utilization of its components. But of course, conservation of biodiversity, it asks for resources. Of course, sustainable utilization of its components should be able to raise these resources for the conservation of biodiversity. But it was noticed that for many countries, it was a real need to mobilize resources in order to be able to keep the first 2 objectives. And then is when the third objective of the Convention of Biological Diversity was formulated, which means, or which strives for fair and equitable sharing of the benefits of the utilization of genetic resources. And this was established by the Nagoya protocol. And the Nagoya protocol that was signed in the city of that name, in Nagoya, Japan, came into force on the 12th of October of 2014 and is now signed by 128 parties, 127 countries and the European Union. And the Nagoya protocol is exactly about access and benefit sharing on access and utilization of genetic resources. Why is the Nagoya Protocol necessary? So if I am showing you a map of terrestrial animal biodiversity in the planet, and when I'm talking about biological diversity, I am talking also about genetic biodiversity. This is what stands up. The red points in the planet and the yellow points in the planet are hotspots of animal biodiversity. And when you look at this map, the concept of sovereignty on national genetic resources stands up. If the Convention on Biological Diversity wants to conserve biodiversity, it needs to strive for the conservation of biodiversity in those sites that are hotspots of biodiversity. And as you see in the map, these are mainly localized around the equator. They are in South America, they are in Africa, and these are possibly places in which the availability of resources to take care of the biodiversity are not at their best. Then, if we draw on this map, the map of the utilization of genetic resources, it clearly stands up that the genetic resources are mainly utilized and valorized in the countries that you see in green, and possibly we are lacking China in this map. So the biodiversity hotspots are in what people call normally the global south, while the utilization of these genetic resources and the value obtained from these genetic resources is obtained somewhere else. And from here, what stands up is the need to share the benefits arised from the utilization of this biodiversity and coming back to the providing countries. So if a country is providing for a resource that we can exploit, some of the benefits should be returning back to this country. So many people are talking or sometimes defend that Nagoya Protocol is about show me the money. It's a little bit more than show me the money. It's about mobilizing resources to conserve biodiversity in those places where biodiversity needs to be conserved. So genetic resources belong to somebody. So in the photograph in the left, I'm showing you a picture that I took this Sunday walking with my son around my village. This is my favorite flower. It's Armeria euskariensis. It's the only endemic species to the Basque Country. And it lives only in my village and in the village next to mine. And these are Spanish genetic resources. And when I show you the algae below here, Urgorri complanatus, it's a microalgae that was first described in the estuary of Bilbao. But then it was described in some other places. But this algae was isolated from the estuary of Bilbao, and then it belongs to Spain. My favorite flower is the one in the bottom. My second favorite flower is the one in the bottom. It's a family of Armeria euskariensis. It's Armeria maritima. And in Galicia, they call it the herba de enamorar. It's said that if you take this flower in the night of St. John and you put it underneath the pillow of the person you are in love with, he or she will fall in love completely with you. This flower from Galicia, it's Spanish genetic resources, but as you see, there is traditional knowledge associated to this flower. This flower makes you fall in love with some else. So the Nagoya Protocol is not only taking care of who the genetic resources belong to, it also tries to keep the traditional knowledge associated to these genetic resources. That's what it tries to say too. In the right, you see, for instance, we are talking with people from Portugal. In Portugal, the Nagoya Protocol regulations say free access to everybody, but there is a specific legislation in Azores area. And I have put you a photograph that I took myself in Fayal, in the Azores Islands, the Portuguese man of war. If you take the Portuguese man of war in Portugal, those are genetic resources of Portugal, although you could be working with Portuguese man of war somewhere else, for instance, in the Mediterranean. That was the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1913. So we need to define what genetic resources are in the scope of the Nagoya Protocol. Genetic resources are defined in the common umbrella as any biological material which contains genes and/or metabolic material that may be derived from genes. So physically, it must be material that contains genetic material. That means that digital sequence information is out of scope under the Nagoya Protocol, and we will come back to this afterwards. You have to take into account that the Nagoya Protocol is implemented in the different countries, and the different countries may have their own definition of genetic resources, and you have to be aware of that, because in some countries it may happen that digital sequence information is also within a scope of the access and benefit sharing regulations. Utilization of genetic resources is defined in general terms as the process of performing research and development activities on the genetic composition and/or biochemical composition of the genetic resources, including by means of biotechnological applications. This is important because in many circumstances, many of the things that we could be doing with genetic resources are not considered utilization. So, for instance, keeping in a collection is not utilization of genetic resources, or breeding in general is not considered utilization of genetic resources. And then the last definition is what is considered biotechnology. It's any technological application that utilizes biological systems and life organisms or their derivatives for the creation or modification of products and processes for specific uses. Okay, with these common definitions, we need to understand that for us that work in the marine environment, Nagoya is on national sovereignty. So genetic resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction are not considered within the Nagoya Protocol. And the Nagoya Protocol considers the exclusive economic zone of each country as sovereign realm of that country. And it's considered within the ABS regulations. How does the Nagoya Protocol work? The Nagoya Protocol is standing on 3 different pillars. One on access, one on benefit sharing, and another one on compliance. And when it comes to Europe, the access and benefit sharing pillars are under national regulations. So the competent authorities are the national authorities. And after ratifying the Nagoya, different countries have legislated around access and benefits sharing, and most of the countries in Europe have awarded free access to their genetic resources so they can be utilized for academic and non-academic uses. but there are a set of countries, which are the ones you have here, Malta, Bulgaria, Spain, France, and Croatia, that have issued specific regulations on access to their genetic resources. That means that in these countries, and according to the law, you have to ask permission before sampling for access to these genetic resources. That's what it's called PIC, previous informed consent, in which you have to specify time of access, place of access, species, and methods that are used. And then you have to negotiate benefit sharing with this country that could be according to monetary or non-monetary principles, and this money by the country in principle should be devoted to preserve biodiversity. Okay, this is what, when you negotiate this, you negotiate two documents that are called previous informed consent and MAT, mutual agreed terms, in which you agree with the country of origin in the way in which you are going to be sharing benefits with that country. Last but not least, there is another pillar, the compliance pillar, that in Europe, it's in the hands of the European Commission, and that asks you to prove due diligence. And the due diligence has to be presented by the user. You have to be able to prove that you have obtained your PIC and MAT under the access and benefits sharing regulations in the country of origin. And this is documentation that you need to keep with you for 20 years. Nowadays, the Nagoya Protocol has been ratified by 128 countries. Turkmenistan, it's about to ratify. The last country to ratify was Montenegro in August. That means that in principle, there are 128 different regulations around the world around access and benefit sharing. As a user, you should be aware of the regulations in the country you are accessing to obtain your genetic resources. So in order to keep all this information available for everybody, there is the Access and Benefit Sharing Clearinghouse, where you could find all the information of all the ABS national focal points, which will be the people with whom you will have to negotiate PIC and MAT in each circumstance, and where you have all the legal framework of all the countries that have regulated on access and benefit sharing. This is a repository where all this information is kept permanently. If you think about Spain and Portugal, I'm talking from Spain to mainly people in Portugal, and thinking about Europe, the two countries that have regulated on access and benefit sharing are Spain and France. Portugal, free access to genetic resources with the exception of Azores. Spain ratified or published its law in 2017, and since 2017 it has been awarding PIC and MAT for different uses of their genetic resources, and this automatically in the access and benefits sharing clearinghouse, it is transformed into an internationally recognized certificate of compliance that you can use to show and prove your due diligence. And if you see, from the year 2017 to today, nearly finishing 2020, Spain has awarded a total of 86 permits, and I will say only 86 permits. And France, in around the same time, has awarded a total of 353 Nagoya permits. And I would say also only, because there should be more people using genetic resources in academia and industry, that it reflects the level of permits that have been awarded. And all these permits that have been awarded for non-commercial use. There is not a single example of PIC math and then internationally recognized certificate of compliance awarded in Spain and France for uses of genetic resources for commercial use. You need to be aware of the landscape of regulations, because each country is very specific according to these legislations. And this is in Spanish, comes from the Spanish law. And in the Spanish law, you can see that anything that is considered a commodity, something that you use for food or feed, it's out of scope of the Spanish legislation. But if you see here, when you are using genetic resources for exclusively for taxonomic purposes, it's considered out of scope. But instead, in France, it's within a scope. This gives you an idea of the differences that could be in the different frameworks in different countries that you have to be aware of, depending on where you are collecting your samples. So the Nagoya protocol is not simple. It increases bureaucracy and it causes delays in research and development. If you see the graph here, this is the time to permit that it's observed in Nagoya protocol countries. The delay in the permit to access the genetic resources, it goes up to 12 months. I should say that in Spain, it works very well. And for a Spanish researcher accessing its genetic resources, the delay is 2 months. So it's pretty good. But have a look at the graph in the bottom. When you are contacting the national contact points, and this is an experience by the German collection of microorganisms, contacting national contact points in all the countries signing the Nagoya protocol, most of them do not respond. So you are not finding anybody in the other side of the phone or the email to negotiate pick and mat with. And at the moment being, this is something that is happening in the last year in Portugal too. As you see, the project needs a series of steps. You need to identify the regulations and authorities, contact them, negotiate documents, previous informed consent, mutual agreed terms, and then sample. And after sampling, if you want to transfer this sample, you need mutual material transfer agreements. And that is when research and development comes. So users need to negotiate bilaterally with country of origin, and the process of research and development is delayed. So this is where I work in. I work in a marine biological station, and I have biological resources. I have culture collections and biobanks, and I provide research services. So if I provide genetic resources, I need to be aware of the Nagoya protocol, because otherwise I am completely out of business. And in the EBB project, that's what we have done. We have assembled a series of culture collections around the Atlantic area. So culture collections in Portugal, in Spain, in France, in the UK, and in Ireland. And we have been working on our best practice guidelines for our culture collections and biobanks. That means that we are doing things according to the Nagoya protocol, and in principle, on doing so, we should be looking sexy for anybody out there willing to obtain genetic resources. And maybe it would be worth obtaining these genetic resources from ourselves because we are doing things correctly according to the Nagoya Protocol. On the other hand, we are working in the EB project in improving our web portals to search and find the genetic resources in our collections. And the best example is the Roscoff culture collection, where you can find the strains they have in the collection, and you can find whether the strain in their collection is cleared from the Nagoya Protocol point of view, maybe because it was sampled previous to the adoption of the Nagoya Protocol. In the EBB project, what we have done, this is new legislation, and we need to learn by doing. And we have tested the Nagoya Protocol, and we have learned on how to do Nagoya by negotiating ourselves our peaks and mats. And we have created guidelines on how to do Nagoya for a specific communities of users. And this is an example of another project in which we help for the elaboration of the best way of obtaining Nagoya clearance for the biomonitoring of benthic biodiversity in different European countries. Last two slides. Nagoya Protocol is something that is moving. And one of the things that is moving too is to the areas beyond national jurisdiction. What is happening in the areas beyond national jurisdiction? It doesn't belong to any country, but in principle, it belongs to the whole human beings. So then the benefits arising from the use of genetic resources in areas beyond national jurisdiction should be also shared. And this is a paper that was published 2 years ago that showed that most of the patents arise from sequences obtained in organisms in areas beyond national jurisdiction have been issued by a single company. But if you see, all these patents predate the Nagoya Protocol, and the Nagoya Protocol resulted in a drop in the rate of patenting sequences from the areas beyond national jurisdiction. So the areas beyond national jurisdiction are of issue of concern now and discussion now under the UN. Last, the COP15, the 15th meeting of the Conference of the Parties for the Convention of the Biological Diversity, that should have gathered this year and will be gathering next year, is to negotiate and define the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. And many of the parties within this COP15 want to incorporate digital sequence information into the Nagoya track. So we could be considering that maybe in the future, there will be incorporation of the digital sequence information into the Nagoya regulations. In this way, as scientists, we see that this could be a barrier for open science, and we have recently published a paper, a white paper, where we show which could be the policy mechanisms not to impede, not to avoid open science. And with that, I hope I have been able to show you a little bit which is the regulation landscape around access and benefit sharing in the world. Thanks a lot. And I am open to questions.
Thanks very much, Yvonne. Indeed, I'm mostly worried about the audience getting lost in because of some term or because it's unavoidable. We come from the academic world, and there may be things that we take for granted. So please don't hesitate to ask questions if you need so. We will try in the next presentation to make things even more simple. what Yvonne has done is to provide, as he has just said, this general overview and kind of expose you to the complexity and the superposition of legal frameworks. It's not easy. And I suppose the bottom line is we are sorry, but you will need to find your way through it. But at least our aim is, well, to, in a way, to wake you up, some of you. I know that I've been having a look at the list of participants. I know that some of you are friends and you know, but maybe some others don't. In particular, those who come from the private sector, maybe. And well, so if there is no other question, I would like just to make well, two things. The first thing is that in order to see whether you understood something very basic, I would like to ask Carla to launch the next question. It's the third one. And because I think we are all Portuguese, or most of us are Portuguese or Spanish, it's a question specific for us. Carla, can you? Yes. So let's imagine that you are a user of genetic resources and that those genetic resources were collected in Portugal, but in fact you are working in Spain, okay? So the question is, what piece of legislation do you need to consult to know whether you need to request a permit? We are talking about these ABS permits or Nagoya permits, or as you want to call them, or not. So would you have to take into account Spanish legislation, or because you're in Spain, or it would be more Portuguese legislation, or this will depend on whether your nationality? So let's see what people, I'm not going to answer.
Sorry, I have.
No, it's okay.
By the way, the people is asking whether we will be sharing the PowerPoints and with the audience.
Yes, I've seen that you've already answered that it's not a problem. We can share this presentation. We will. I'm not sure, Carla, if we can do that through you or otherwise.
Yes, Belen, we will, after in a few days, in next days, we will have the videos, the recordings, and the presentations ready, and then we will share. Yes. Maybe
I can also add that the project, the EBB project, and ourselves, you can find us easily. We have been helping users. So if you have a question, we are glad to help. And as Fid will explain just in 1 minute, we have been doing that in the framework of the and in fact, Yvonne and Fid in particular, personally, they have been kind of accompanying projects and users of marine genetic resources that have been asking themselves, okay, do we have to ask for a permit or not? Is my research in the scope of this legislation or not? How should I go about it? And that's how we have learned. We have learned by doing, basically. Anyway, can we see the results?
Okay, not everyone voted, but I don't know, one last chance. Don't be shy, even if you don't know, you are here to learn. So no, so I'm going to stop.
Okay. I think this is something that Yvonne mentioned during his presentation, and we will insist on this, and this is very important. So really what it matters here is the origin of the genetic resource, the place where this genetic resource was collected. And that's what you need to bear in mind, and that's what makes it very difficult, because sometimes you are in a country and you are from a country, but you need to know what happens in South Africa, let's say, if the genetic resource you are using comes from there. So that's what makes it difficult, and that's how Now we will try to explain how to, well, to find a solution for that. But yes, it's important to understand that the origin, the provenance of the genetic resource is really the key point here. Thanks for the answer. I'm reading now another comment from Elisabeth from the German collection of microorganisms and cell cultures. Indeed, this is, well, a collection that is registered, and they are definitely Nagoya compliant. And so it's a really great example. You have her comments there. They are building a help desk and a website for the academic sector. And and I will also take the opportunity to say that we are just one of many projects and resources currently available that kind of try to help users and to provide this information in a more or less digested way so that users can be compliant and can do their research legally. Okay, so let's go on. Fit, sorry, so now Fit will present our use cases and what we have learned through this process.
Okay, thank you, Belen.
Thanks.
So. Okay, I guess you can hear me properly and see my screen. Okay, so I'm going to present the experience that mainly, as Beren said, Yvonne and myself has done during the project, helping users to try to understand and the needs and all the things that everybody needs to do in order to carry out research and be compliant with ABS frameworks. So, as has been mentioned before, the aim of EBB project is to facilitate access to marine genetic resources, and it has been done through two main points. So the provision of marine genetic resources by EBB culture collections. You can see a map with culture collections that are included in our project and the logos of the institutions. And the other thing that we have done is supporting users to get access and to utilize genetic resources in compliance with access and benefit sharing frameworks. So in order to do that, we have put ourselves in the shoes of a user and try to develop use case studies and by doing all the paperwork. And the idea was to identify all the constraints and problems. So learning by doing and try to present easy solutions. So we have to develop up to 30 use cases, and we have included in a deliverable, some of them 15. And here you can see some of the projects that we have helped. So cockles and scuba cancer and haze, microalgae, assemble, and some of the institutions that are the lead institutions of these projects. So we have requested permits and do the paperwork for in situ genetic resources. So that means genetic resources that were collected in the wild, and also for ex situ genetic resources, so resources that were deposited in culture collections and that were supplied to users. And just an example, we have in all these use cases genetic resources from 10 European countries and 3 non-European countries. And here I present briefly what we have set as the methodology. So it's mainly what Yvonne has described previously. And the first thing that we have to bear in mind when we want to do our research is to know if the genetic resources that we want to utilize are in the scope of the European regulation, and then in the scope of the national regulations, if they are. So here there are some examples of what is considered utilization and is in the scope of the ABS regulation. So one example can be isolation of a biochemical compound from a genetic resource that can be used and incorporated into cosmetics or any pharmaceutical products. The selections of molecular markers involved in traits of interest for the breeding in aquaculture marine species. So imagine we want to identify a molecular marker related to growth rate or disease resistance in one species of interest, such as Pacific oyster. Also, the isolation of any marine genetic resources from water samples to develop any products that can be used for plant health. And another example can be the identification of compounds of marine genetic resources, such as sponges or ascidians, bacteria, that can be used to fight against certain types of diseases, such as virus, cancers, or whatever. We have also to bear in mind, as Yvonne has said, that there is a space scope, so the place where we collect our samples, and a temporal scope that can be at least from the 12th of October 2014, so the entry into force of the Nagoya Protocol and the ratification by the European Union. And in other cases, we have also to look at the legislation in place in the country where that is the origin of the genetic resource. For example, in Spain is 2017, when the access to genetic resources was regulated. So if we were not aware of the regulations in the different countries, as Yvonne said, we went to the ABS clearinghouse and tried to find for a specific country if there is any legislation in place regarding the access to genetic resources. And if needed, we contacted the ABS national focal point to request any information and to determine if our the research that we want to carry out and the genetic resources that we want to utilize are in the scope of the regulations of that country. And if the answer was yes, we try to obtain the permits. As Yvonne said, the permits are the prior informed consents that grant the access to the genetic resource if there are conditions that needs to be negotiated, are going to be negotiated and reflected in the mutually agreed terms, the MAT. And once we have all these permits, the country will issue an internationally recognized certificate of compliance that will be available in the ABS clearinghouse. And we have to bear in mind that we need to keep the information as a proof for 20 years after the end of the use. So quite a lot of time. And at the end, we need to declare that we have done all the steps and we have accessed these genetic resources complying with the legislation. And so the European regulation established 2 European checkpoints that are the application for research funding and the final development of a product. And so we need to prove that we have the permits, and that can be done with the IRCC. And as also Yvonne said, we cannot transfer unless we have an MTA, so a material transfer agreement that allows us to do so. So these are the steps that we have followed, and we have learned some lessons, and here I present some of them, and also some recommendations. So as Yvonne has also shown, complying with Nagoya involves an additional cost for researchers. In academia or in the private companies, it takes time, and time is money. So we need also to be aware that there are an extra cost, that there are resources available to help us, but sometimes this will involve money, and also that project calls have not until now incorporated any funding to cover this type of costs. Also, we need to plan with enough time our experiments, because as Yvonne said, we need to get all the permits, and it takes a lot of time. At least in Spain, as for non-commercial purposes, is up to 2 months, but it can be more depending on the country, depending if it's a online platform to request the permits, and we cannot use and sample the genetic resources until we have all the permits. Another recommendation can be that we need to be explicit in our query when we contact the national focal point, and try to define well the place where we want to collect the samples, all the purposes and methodologies that we are going to use in our research in order that they can provide an advice and let us know if our research needs to request the permits for access and benefit sharing compliance. Sometimes the boundary between different definitions are not clear, and this relates to the next title that I included here. What is the boundary between a genetic resource and a commodity? A commodity is a good or a product that is in the market for use, but is not related to research. But sometimes we can buy in the market a commodity, buy any fish in the market, in the supermarket, and use it to carry out research and development. So depending on the country, and for example, in Spain is the interpretation, even if we buy a genetic resource that comes from the supermarket and can be considered a commodity, we will need to request the permits. There are also extra due diligence checkpoints, and we need to be aware of that. There are two that I mentioned before that are included in the European regulation, but other countries, such as Spain, can have any others, such as the one that is included in the Spanish legislation. When we request a patent, we need to request also permits, and we need to declare that we want to do this patent. And also can be another checkpoints at its institutional level, such as ethics bodies that will not allow us to give them the samples for analysis until we prove that we have all the permits. Another thing that we have learned is that there is different interpretation in the retrospectivity when we access genetic resources from ex situ, and that's the case of Spanish legislation. When we access to genetic resources, Spanish genetic resources deposited in a Spanish culture collection, the moment of accessing to that strain is what triggers the utilization. So even if it was deposited before the entry into force of the ABS regulation of Spain. So before 2017, we need to request a permit if we want to use it in 2020, because 2020 is considered the moment of utilization. As Yvonne mentioned, there is also a specificity of utilization depending on the country. So, for example, taxonomic studies are in the scope of the French ABS regulations, but in Spain are out of scope. And before finish, the two last ones are, we have found some language barriers when we have contacted some of the national focal points, and also that's because some of the templates for requesting permits are in a national language that we didn't understand, or because the national legislation is in the home language of the country, and that can be a problem. So the best thing will be that in the future, everything is in English, so people can understand legislation of all the countries. And in some cases, just to finish, there is also important to collaborate with a local partner. Yes, this can be decisive in some countries, and also can be imposed by different ABS legislations. So I hope that helps. And before finishing, as Belén mentioned, we are available, and if you need anything that we can help, you can contact us.
Thanks a lot. I was, Yvonne was there moving his head. I don't know if he wants to add something, because as I said, they've been both asking for permits and having this practical experience. So Yvonne, go. And
no,
if someone has questions, sorry.
I was moving my head because somebody came into my office.
I have some problem here.
Okay. Well, yes, as I said, I know it's a lot of information. Our intention is well, just to tell you, look, this is all we've been dealing with, and we cannot yes, explain everything in a deep way. This is, I know, superficial, but I hope it somehow triggers something in you if you are really doing research and development and utilizing genetic resources, because you need to comply, and that's the important thing. You are European, you need to comply, you need to be aware of all this. So if now I can't see okay, I'm going to follow the chat. If there's nothing in particular, we will go to the roundtable, I think. I'm just a little bit worried that there is somebody that wants to ask a question. Please do not refrain yourself, just put it in the chat and we will try to address it, okay? But now maybe, yes, in order to make this a little bit more active, we will now talk with, I'm afraid, well, in principle, it was going to be 4 guests. We were going to have 4 guests, but I'm afraid we only have 3 right now. So anyway, Carla, if you can enable Juliana, Sandra, and Raquel to be with us now so that we can see them. I will try to, I can share my screen also, so that you see her faces while they are not there. And I will very briefly introduce them before I hear them or something. I cannot hear them yet. So we have two women from Portugal. Okay, Raquel is there, and 2 women from Spain, so as to get some gender balance also. No, that's a joke. As they are all professionals and experts that are either linked with the project to a certain extent, or they do research with biological resources, or they have some experience with Nagoya protocol, as we will discover. I'm afraid that Martina will not be with us. We will see, like, maybe she will join later. Yes.
Belén, so I think she's here, but she's using a different name.
Okay.
Maria, okay.
Maria Jose Chapela.
Yeah.
Okay, she's here.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. So she, so Martina is using probably just the link.
Yeah, she is ready now.
Where she works. Okay, good. So what I would like is that, we have a chat with them. As I said, they have been kind of exposed to Nagoya protocol to us to some way or another. So that we get more sort of practical input from people like these four participants, these four panelists, I will just like to say a few words about them, and also, to ask them to talk. So we have Sandra Ramos from CIMAR. CIMAR, I'm sure everybody knows, the Center of Marine Research in Porto, that belongs to the University of Porto, and is one of the most important research institutions in the country and in Europe. Sandra is a researcher herself. Sandra, are you there? No. You will have to open your microphone if you are there. I can't see everybody. Maybe Sandra is not there. Okay, no problem. So our next researcher is Martina. She's an expert in aquaculture. She works for ANFACO, that is an association, non-for-profit cluster that is related to marine and food, food that coming from the sea. She's involved in several projects that have to do with this area, and she has been one of our users. So what I would like, Martina, is that you explain to us a little bit how and when you became first aware of the existence of Nagoya protocol.
Okay, hello. First of all, Belén, sorry, because I've just seen your emails. There was something wrong with the Zoom session. Apparently, was another user's session was open. I don't know what happened. I'm not very familiar with Zoom.
It doesn't matter. You are there.
But anyway, you sorted it out, so perfect. ANFACO is also participant of the EBB project, so we are a bit involved in learning about genetic resources management, but I'm not the person who is in charge of the project here. So my knowledge of the Nagoya protocol is superficial, and my first contact with it was when we got involved in the project. So we're working in another project funded by the Atlantic Area Program, which was mentioned by Fee, the enhanced microalgae, which makes part of the use cases of the EBB, and we use microalgae strains for different applications regarding aquaculture or human nutrition, bioactivities, cosmetic uses, pharmaceutical, whatever. So we bought 3 strains, microalgae strains from the University of Vice Country. And yes, related to the use of this algae was the application for a permit to use this genetic resources.
So when you bought them and you asked yourselves, do we need to ask a permit or not because we are buying them, and what happens, and can we use them just as such? So those were the questions that you were asking yourselves.
Yes, that was it. So since we had a direct contact with EBB, we have to ask, what shall we do? And yes, we have to submit an application. It's a very simple procedure. In our case, Spain has a specific regulation to manage the access to the genetic resources. So we just submitted a form which was provided by FIT, just describing briefly the work we plan to do with the microalgae. This was a non-profit use, and it was just a screening for the nutritional composition, and also to search for bioactivities, potential bioactivities such as an antioxidant or antibacterial against aquaculture pathogens. So we just submit the form through the online site of the Ministry for the Ecological Transition in Spanish. And this was, I have the dates here. This was in July, by the end of July. And then in the beginning of August, we received a call from the Basque Country government, because the Basque Country government is the responsible to manage the genetic resources which come from the Basque Country, because these 3 microalgae strains were isolated by people from the University of the Basque Country, and they are deposited in the Basque Country. The phone call was just a tramit to check that I have actually made application and so on. And that was it. A few weeks later, we received the IRCC, and that was all.
In fact, this is, when we talked about this, I remember I was quite surprised about this follow-up phone call from the government from the Basque Country. But that proves, in a way, your example is very interesting, because it proves that, well, things are, to a certain extent, things can happen more or less smoothless. So the conclusion would be, okay, you just need to bear in mind that you need some time to do the permit, but it looked reasonably easy to you. You were, of course, also helped to a certain extent, but it's interesting that they had this phone call, like saying, well, who are you? Are you doing what you said you were doing? So they are keeping an eye. And this also shows differences are in the case in the complexity, because we have regions, and so the legislation may even differ slightly. And now, if you don't mind, Martina, I would like to switch to Raquel Gallao from the Blue Bio Alliance, Blue Bio Alliance, and very interesting, because she's been doing some research around Nagoya Protocol implementation in Portugal. And it's a little bit a contrasting, or it's a peculiar thing, I would say. We'll let her explain what's her approach. I would say that from the Spanish perspective, it looks a little bit, even if it's efficient, we sometimes, Spanish, wonder, do we really need this framework? Whereas to protect biodiversity. Whereas in the case of Raquel, she was indeed asking that same question in the Portuguese community. So let's hear what she found out. Raquel.
Thank you, Belén. Thank you, Fij, and thank you all for inviting me to be here today. Like Belén said, I have been conducting a policy study in the last year because in Portugal we are a signatory of the Nagoya Protocol. We ratified in 2017, and we have a decree law, but we do not have a system implemented to regulate the access and benefit sharing of the genetic resources. So what happens is for the foreigners users that want to access our genetic resources, they see that we are a signatory, and they ask, as Fij explained the steps, they go to ABC Clearinghouse, they see who is the national focal point, they try to contact them, but the national focal point is not answering because they do not have the staff to take care of this issue. So the first problem, and this is why I conducted this study, is that I wanted to understand what's happening, why we are not receiving some information on the national focal point. And also I had this idea that Azores, that is an autonomous region here in Portugal, it's an archipelago, they are doing something. So I wanted to compare these two situations, understand what is happening, reviewing what's happening, but also interview users, potential users of these resources, and see what they think about this, and in what conditions they would be willing to have a system implemented in Portugal. So just to sum up what I did, and it was very interesting because I learned a lot. I learned that there is these regulatory system, because the national focal point doesn't have the staff to control this, so they rather to have this condition with no implementation because it doesn't slow down processes. But we have others that would rather to have this implemented because it would deliver higher legal certainty. If there is a contract with different partners, or if you have a consortium applying for funding that needs to be compliant with the Nagoya Protocol and needs to show proof that you are getting the resources in the good way, in the social and fair and sustainable way. They are worried about that. And they are also worried that foreign companies come to Portugal, they use our resources, they don't say to nobody, they do patents, and then we in Portugal doesn't have a lot of benefits, and we don't benefit with it. At least, for example, Azor says that it's good to, for example, if someone is sampling here in Portugal, we can have local researchers on board, and this can be a benefit that we can agree on. And I think Nagoya Protocol tries to address this, sharing of benefits. But yeah, I discovered that, just to sum up, I discovered that the ones that do want the Nagoya Protocol, the only way they would want that is if we have a platform, an online platform, like we already have here in Portugal for other administration bodies, a platform where we could, submit the form and get the permit digitally in a way that is easy. It doesn't slow down processes. I know this is a little bit utopic, but I believe that the digitalization and these platforms can really help on this. And if this system is already in place, the Nagoya Protocol, people are ratifying the Nagoya Protocol. The Nagoya Protocol exists. It's a fact. So if it exists, we should do it in an effective way. So my study was to understand how could it be effective, and to, we are worried that, we don't have a stand here. So we are worried that if someone thinks, we need to do something, and this decision will be made with no evidences. So what I did was to collect evidences about the need and how we could do this. And so the politicians and the administration bodies have these evidences to have an informed decision to proceed to the next step. So this is what was my experience with the Nagoya Protocol. I did a policy study and a policy brief. And yeah, I hope this is helpful for the focal point to make a decision and take a stand, hopefully soon.
Excellent. Yes, so I would like to remind that not all countries, all countries need to, if they are signatory of the Nagoya Protocol, they have to respect the other countries' legislation. As we said, take care of where the genetic resource comes from, etc. But that does not imply necessarily that the country itself, let's say, I don't know, Holland, decides that they also want to protect their own genetic resources, okay? And so the case that Raquel is mentioning is, I find it intriguing and also good in the sense that they are kind of, before, putting in place complex legislations, really thinking to what extent is worth doing it, etc. And so now I would like to go to France with Juliana Carvajal. Juliana Carvajal, I hope she's there. Juliana?
Yes, hi everyone. Can you
excellent. Juliana works for Polmer, Bretagne Atlantique, which is a cluster also related to the blue economy in France, in the north of France. So she is also part of EBB, and she has been in contact with the more the private sector and also kind of doing this work of assisting them. So I would like also to ask her, well, she knows a little bit more the case in France, so maybe you can just provide us, well, your experience, just a brief summary of what you have experienced with Nagoya Protocol and this.
Thank you very much, everyone. Belen, Yvonne, Fisa, and all the panelists. Yes, indeed, I work in EBB, so it hasn't been a very rich experience and very interesting. So as Belen said, I work in a maritime cluster, so we have almost 400 members, and they are just the most of them are SMEs. But we work also with academia and research centers, and this project is it's in one of our areas that has resources, biological marine resources. And our idea was try to raise awareness about Nagoya, because as you already talked and discussed, it's a very complex subject, and must for companies because they are not aware about it in the first place. So that's one of our main objectives. And the second one is try to help them to reach these authorizations. But it's very complex for the enterprises, because some of them are in the research and development stage. So they don't know exactly what are the molecule or the species that they are going to really use for the final product. So that's one of the main complex things in their process. And also, once they know what are the molecules or the species, there are some confidentiality issues. So it's very complex to get them to understand the information, to give us the whole information. So the case in France is they signed in 2017, and we are in 2020, and it seems like it's been 3 years, so it's been a long time ago. But I mean, for this kind of legislation, 3 years is a very short time of period. So at first, it was very hard for the enterprises and even researchers to get all the information about Nagoya with the national contact points as Portugal, as Raquel said before. But I think that in the case of France, it's better now. Maybe it took a year for them to really install the procedure in their platform in internet. So now it's very, I mean, it's complex, but it's more easy. It's easier for enterprises and researchers to understand and to have someone in the other line to say them how to do and what to do. So for now that it's the case, we have different cases. Yvonne and Fis have already talked about this kind of process. But that's my experience about Nagoya. I think that it's very interesting, and I think that it's a subject that we need to put in on the table and talk about it, and try to just harmonize the procedures, at least in Europe, and then see if we can just reply or duplicate this kind of process beyond.
Yeah, well, Raquel has just mentioned that it would be okay that Portuguese researchers, let's say, would be willing to have that burden as long as it was more efficient than online. So this is more or less the case in France and Spain. So maybe Portugal can learn from that. And but you've highlighted one of the problems that we also encountered in EBB, in the sense that it was difficult to reach the private sector because they are in a yeah, they work in a different, they have a different modus operandi, let's say, and I would be happy if someone from the private sector was there and commented or shared something with us through the chat if they've had this experience with Nagoya protocol. And I think that, yes, for the private sector, it's basically that, well, they need to know about this. It's actually what you said. And then in terms of information sources, there are lots. And well, maybe the question, and that's a question I would like to ask, and then we can discuss about it, is to what extent it's really necessary to have someone, really a specialist in, at least in big institutions, that takes care of this and supports the researchers in the big company or in the research institution, that there is someone that centralizes this kind of information and this kind of legal assistance, let's say, because otherwise it takes time. And I would like to now to introduce you to Sandra Ramos from CIMAR. Maybe Sandra, you can open your camera, well, I don't see you now. And hello, Sandra.
Hi, hello.
So Sandra will be representing a little bit the academia sector and Portuguese academia sector. But in fact, Sandra, I know that Sandra has not had to require a permit, but in fact, you did ask yourself, do I have to do it or not? Maybe you can tell us your story.
Yes. Hello, good morning to everybody. Thanks for inviting me to be here. And thank you for the organization of this really interesting workshop about such a complex protocol as Nagoya. And I learned a lot today. And one of the things is that as more as I learn about this protocol, the more really I want to be away from it, because everybody of you are saying that this is really complex and it takes a lot of time, and you have to be with a lot of patience to fulfill all the things. Fortunately, my experience with the Nagoya protocol was not that complicated. So I'm going to give you another perspective of that. So the first time that I heard about the Nagoya protocol, it was in 2014 when we were participating in the International Sampling Campaign, the Ocean Sampling Day. I don't know if you heard about it. So by then, we and another colleague of mine, we were including some samples from Portugal in this international sharing data. And they asked us about the ABS. It was the first time that I heard the term ABS. I had no idea what that was. And by then, they asked us to contact the Portuguese focal point or whatever, the institution in charge, and ask if we have to sign it. And fortunately, I was contacting the person, and they told me that you're lucky because Portugal hasn't signed the protocol yet. So you don't need to write, you don't need to fill any ABS permits. And I say, perfect. So, and after that, I remember that we got some internal information from CIMAR, some email alerting us to the need to have the Nagoya protocol and to see if we need to ask for a permit or something. And also CIMAR organized a seminar to teach us and to explain us what was the protocol and how we could apply, and mostly to focus the need that we have to take the Nagoya protocol in mind when we're planning and doing our research. So, and my last experience was last year. So last year I was planning a large international oceanographic campaign. I was responsible for the collection of fish samples, and these collections were planned to be in different locations around the world. So you can imagine North Atlantic, South Atlantic, Pacific, and in the Indian Ocean. And immediately the Nagoya protocol came to my mind, and I say, oh my God, I need to go and do some research and try to see what I need to do about it. But fortunately, I knew Belém from another project. And we were talking, and she told me that she was working with Nagoya protocol. And I say, perfect. So you can help me and give me some assistance with this. And as far as we were talking, we came to the conclusion that all the samplings that we were planning to take were coming from the international waters. So no sample from national jurisdiction waters. And Belaine told me, explained me that the Nagoya protocol was not implemented into international waters. So I didn't need to apply to a request for the Nagoya protocol. And that was perfect for me. I say, thank you so much, Belaine. It's a blessing. And so it was my experience with Nagoya protocol, but from all the things that you were explaining and the more I learn about it, I realized that it's a really tricky protocol, and it's a very complicated scheme. I was also asking some colleagues from CIMAR nowadays that I know that they are working with that. And they asked me, they told me that it's very complicated. They also corroborate your opinion. And they told me that if you ever need, we can assist you, but good luck on that. Yeah, it was my experience.
Thanks, Sandra. So yeah, indeed, one of the things I think we probably should somehow transmit to a certain extent is this, that, well, it's not impossible, of course, and it's not the only legal framework we have to comply with also. So, I mean, it's not only about Nagoya, but the fact is that maybe, yes, it would be more efficient if this was kind of centralized, and if institutions had someone they could rely on, and so that their researchers could concentrate on what they have to do, and this part of the Nagoya protocol handling could be dealt with by someone else. But I should also highlight, and well, maybe Yvonne or Fitz or someone wants to comment on that. To a certain extent, there is no way around it. I mean, it depends so much on what kind of utilization you do of those genetic resources that the researcher has to be involved, because he's the one who knows what he wants to do, what kind of development he's going to carry out. So, I mean, it's not just something that someone else can do for you like that. But there is something that there is a company that has reacted to my question, and they've said that, well, they are in contact with Fitz da Costa to get their permit. So in Portugal, so someone is doing this. But the other thing I would like to ask, and so that also the audience can answer, and I know we are reaching the end. The same, that maybe having someone at hand to provide support would be helpful. Of course, this requires resources. And the other question would also be, and this links with the comment from the German collection. Maybe you've seen it in the chat. To what extent, Carla, can you throw it's the last poll. So I'm jumping one. Is question number 5, if that's possible. So the question would be, to what extent would you, if you are a user of genetic resources and you buy strains, for instance, as Martina explained, would this be a criteria for you? Would you, knowing that there is this legal framework, would you value that the provider of these biological resources, like a culture collection, would be already Nagoya compliant, so that part of the burden is taken out from your shoulders? Or do you still think that this is not so important, or that you can do it yourself, etc.? It's not I suppose it's more to reflect and to realize that this is a possibility, that there are culture collections that are registering and doing these efforts, as also Yvonne explained. So if you can answer, you don't have to say essential. You don't have to say essential. Just to And in the meantime, maybe, I don't know, Yvonne, Fifth, would you like to add something?
Not really. I think it has been quite a nice set of examples. It's nice to see that people are getting worried when they go and collect the genetic resources, and they think, okay, there is something that is called ABS, so I need some information. And it's nice to see that in the end they do not need to come with their pick and mat because it's out of scope. It also happens to me when I do my research. When I find things that are out of scope in my case, I say, oh la la.
You are relieved.
Yeah.
And but yes, and even in the case of companies, yeah, one possibility would be to go for strains or to look for sources of biological resources that are already doing this, that are Nagoya compliant, and that would for sure help. And otherwise, they just have to be aware of it and yes, contact their national focal points.
Yes.
National focal points of the countries where they've taken the samples. Yes, Juliana, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. If I may, it's just that that's the other thing that I realized within the project is that it's a shame because as Yvonne started his presentation, this protocol has a very cool and nice goal. But the process it's quite hard and complex and messy. So everyone just want to be far from this and just to say, I don't want to be on the scope, or I hope that my sample are not in one country that it's a assigned country for Nagoya and everything. And I think it's a shame. I understand that it's a lot of work for researchers, and the goal at the end of Nagoya is not really achieved. But I think that it's like the profiles are very different. For example, I think it's more legal, politics, or her background. It's all about of this. And in the other hand, the researchers has another profile, and their motivation it's other, very far from legal things and all of that. So I think that this kind of workshops and the projects as EBB just maybe could help us to try to find solutions for this, and try to, as you said, like to have one person in each big institution or in the government that are very experts in the subject, and just try to get things done via them, by them, you know. And that's all.
If I may.
Yeah, sure. Yes.
If I may, I agree with Juliana. You know, there are in Blue Bio Alliance, our goal is it's also to connect people, and I think it was someone said that it would be nice to have contact with companies, local companies, see what they are doing, and I think it's you know, it comes all down the process. The process is difficult. Like Juliana said, the idea of, you know, transparency. I think transparency is key, and I believe transparency is good in terms of, you know, conserving the resources and benefit sharing, but the process is bad. And I think alliances and also clusters like Farmaciano or alliances like Blue Bio Alliance play a key role, or like your project play a key role in connecting and, you know, the cases. I think it's very important. And also, like Fish mentioned, there is no funding for this. So there is something that we have to comply, but no funding to take care of this and to make it effective. So just I wanted to add that I really agree with Juliana, and I think if this is in place, Nagoya is in place, we should really make efforts to make it efficient and to make it more simple, to have the legal experts in each institution to help them, to have the support necessary. and to raise awareness about this issue, that we cannot, assign a protocol and then don't have the means to comply. So this doesn't work.
Thanks so much, Raquel. I think this is the perfect wrap up. I think we've already gone 9 minutes beyond our time limit. Probably we need to stop. Okay, we have the results there of the survey. I think we can close with these reflections, and it's a working process, of course. Please do count on the European Blue Biobank. If you just tap Blue Biobank, you will find our web page. You've seen other references there in the panel. You can find our email addresses. So do not hesitate to contact us, especially the private sector. If you think you have a case and you want to consult with us, we will help. We will try to help, because it's one of the commitments of the project, at least until it finishes next spring. And thanks a lot for being with us today. Thanks to the panel participants and to our experts also, and the experts that are also attending. I've seen their names, and our colleagues. So,
Elaine, sorry, Elaine.
Yes, sure.
Yes, I think there's just here a Q&A questions that I think Yvonne wants to answer. If you want, we can have 2 minutes just before closing. Yvonne, I don't know if you want to answer.
Yeah, I wanted to answer. I have seen there are a couple of questions by Felipe Vilas Boas, but I didn't know how to.
Or if you want to contact them after.
Yeah, he places 2 questions, very lengthy and very deep questions. The first one is on how will Nagoya protocol be controlled? Okay, there are checkpoints. At least there are 2 checkpoints at the European level on whether you are compliant with the Nagoya protocol. But of course, you can devise all your procedures and your molecule commercialization in a way that you misinform on the country of origin, on the biological specimen that you have been used. I mean, any legislation, you have the way to move around it. In any case, if you are a company, you never want to have the label of being a biopirate. And if you don't want to be a biopirate, so a big company would do everything it's possible to avoid the possibility of being called a biopirate. So for many companies, it's worth going through the ABS hassle and look for compliance. That's quite clear. The reason why there are not permits issued for commercial use of genetic resources up to now is just because the legislation is too new. A process for commercialization of products of biological origin are normally very long, and many companies are already implementing ABS methods in their normal work, but normally during the research and development, they obtain permits for non-commercial use, and it's at the moment in which they already have a finished product that they will initiate the process to move into EPIC and MAT for commercial use. I do not know if with that I have been able to answer the first question. And then the second question is philosophical, and I like it. The second question is the Nagoya protocol could be very important for underdeveloped countries, but in developed countries, has it got any meaning? If you ask me, Ivonne Cancio, Uriarte Villanueva, Barturian Ruiz Avaroa, Forum Arenas, ASEAIN, I see no sense for ABS regulations in order to be able to obtain benefits in Spain and in France. I see some sense in what Raquel has said for non-monetary benefits, for incorporating researchers into research projects coming from other countries. I see the benefit there. but otherwise I don't see the benefits in Spain or in France. We should be able to take care of our biodiversity with our economies, even when we are not so rich as some other. Felipe says, instead of ABS, it wouldn't be better to keep biodiversity, to have more marine protected areas? Okay, there are many marine protected areas. Now I think that 17% of the marine surface is protected. Then if you ask me on the quality of the protection measures in those protected areas, I would say that there is no information. So marine protected areas are not working either. And with that, I finish.
I missed the questions. I was following the chat, and indeed they were extremely interesting and kind of deep, like the ocean. So, well, I hope this has been sort of useful and instructive, even if we cannot give all the answers. And thanks Yvonne for these last remarks and explanations. And again, thank you everybody for being here. And yeah, just rely on us if you need it. And see you next time.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Maybe Carla, I don't know if you want to.
Thank you all.
Close.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Thanks.
Well, bye-bye to all of you, and please, Business to See will end tomorrow. So if you want to attend, we still have a program for this morning and for this afternoon, and tomorrow morning we'll end up with a final conference discussing the European Green Deal. So you're all invited. Please, if you need anything.
Thanks, Carla. Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Lots of things.
Very interesting.
Thanks a lot for the organization and for running this so smoothly.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
And continue using your genetic resources.
Yes, safely, legally.
Complying.